Now cast your mind back to March the 31st, 2015, and that unprecedented moment when Nigeria's incumbent president, Goodluck Jonathan, telephoned the former military leader, Muhammadu Buhari, to concede defeat in the presidential election. It was a key moment in Nigeria's history, and it changed everything. The Electoral Commission, INEC, was still announcing the final tally of the ballot, but early numbers indicated that Mr. Buhari had an overwhelming majority of the votes. There had been both national and international calls for calm and a warning by the US and Britain against what they called political interference with the result, amid claims of vote rigging and voter intimidation on both sides. But it was Arise News that actually broke the news that Muhammadu Buhari and his APC party had in fact won the election, and I was the anchor who broadcast that news. Subsequently, President Jonathan took the courageous step of conceding defeat. Take a look at how it all unfolded on that fateful day in March 2015.
Yes, sir.
They are about to connect a call between the President of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, and Muhammadu Buhari, his election opponent. And part of the reason they're flustered is because it's never happened before. What is going to be said is unimaginable.
My name is Reuben Abati. I was official presidential spokesperson of Nigeria to President Goodluck Jonathan. I was always with him because if he needed to issue a statement, if he needed to react to certain issues, that was my job. And then if he needed to give a speech, that was my job to sign off on it. The election took place March 28, 2015. By March 31, it was a Tuesday. The election results were already being announced. 3 states remained. By the time they were announcing Borno State, it was already clear that President Buhari, as he later became, was leading with up to about, 3 million votes. It was at that point that the drama began in the villa. The security people, Department of State Security particularly, and the Office of the National Security Advisor, and I think the Inspector General of Police at that time was also there. They were saying that there could be chaos in the country, that there could be problems, lives will be lost. The people from the Niger Delta were saying the president should stand firm. Some other people, mainly ministers, the Attorney General of the Federation, Mohammed Adoke, they were saying that, look, the president should apply wisdom. And then at the end of the day, the president reiterated the position he had always held, that nobody's ambition is worth the blood of any Nigerian, because there was palpable threat of violence. So President Jonathan weighed all of this together and he said, look, gentlemen, I've listened to all of you, I've heard you, but this country must not burn. People must not lose their lives because we want to win this election by all costs. Then he placed a call to the control room. We had the control room in the villa, and he said, please get me President Buhari on the line.
But the historic phone call that changed Nigeria nearly didn't happen. He couldn't get through at first.
Look, you will expect that on the day when the results were being reported, that there will be a lot of people calling President Buhari at the time. And, it was simply a question of connection. But eventually, President Jonathan was able to get through to him. And then they had that conversation. He congratulated him. President Buhari, congratulations. And that was how it went.
Actually, this is how it went. Remember those breathless assistants putting the call through?
Your Excellency. Hold on, sir. Okay. Hello, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, how are you? I'm all right, Your Excellency. Congratulations. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Yeah, so how are things? Well, I will congratulate you more. Yes, after you find time, some of these days to come so that we can sort out how to plan the transitional period. All right, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. Okay, congratulations. My respect, Your Excellency. Thank you.
That's President Jonathan congratulating General Buhari on winning the election and saying he's going to plan the transition of government between the two men. It was such an incredible call, this recording was released by the government.
Extraordinary, isn't it? And some of those clips you heard there were courtesy of the BBC World Service. Well, let's take a closer look now at how it all unfolded on that fateful day in March 2015 with Nuruddin Mohammed, who, as the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and Supervising Minister of Information, had something of a front row seat in the last days of the Jonathan administration. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Just reflect for us on what happened on that day in 2015 when President Jonathan did what was unprecedented in Nigerian history and conceded defeat to Muhammadu Buhari. What do you remember of how it happened?
Thank you very much, Charles, for having me. I would say before that day, there were a lot of build-up. There was a build-up to that day. And that's why I think I'm important here. Because I think I was witnessing about 3 front row seats. First from the foreign dimension, and then within the government. And I would say at personal level with President Jonathan, because we have developed certain close philosophical and intellectual relationship. And putting all these 3 perspectives together, that day didn't come as a surprise at all to some of us. We have listened to President Jonathan in so many international fora, reiterating his position about free, fair, credible elections, respect for human rights, African renaissance, for Nigeria to act as a springboard for generally emancipation and eventual black civilization in the globe. So we have listened to President Jonathan countless times, from ECOWAS to African Union to United Nations Security Council. And from within the government, which I acted as its spokesperson for a while, I have seen the disposition as well, the commitment, from the way the president opened up the opposition space, allowed for the merger of the APC,
and he could have stopped it if he wanted.
He could have sabotaged it, let's use the word, not stop it, And even before then, from the choice of the INEC chairman, who was a non-independent minded, if you can even add maybe of the radical bent, So that day, the phone call was just the climax of a person who has said it, who had acted it, just completing it. So some of us who are witnesses on these tables, I would say, were not surprised. We were just fulfilled. And as President Buhari said, my respect. For me, that was the word. He said, my respect, Mr. President. And I think that's what President Jonathan should cherish, because
indeed,
even lately, going around the world, engaging in so many activities. When you introduce yourself as a former minister to President Jonathan, in fact, his foreign minister, you need to see the awe, you need to see the respect. So for me, it came naturally. That was Jonathan, essentially.
Right. So he is, in every sense of the word, a statesman.
I will say that unequivocally, really.
But of course, Goodluck Jonathan may have set that very high standard, but no one has yet followed in his footsteps, have they? Certainly not in Nigeria, although that standard has been, I think, emulated in other countries in Africa. But the tradition here that an incumbent never concedes defeat seems to be continuing.
Yeah, a very respected professor of international relations and sustainable development approached me about 3 months ago. And he said, "We're Nigerian. How about Goodluck Jonathan?" I said, I was his Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he shook my hand. And he said, "But let me ask you something. Why is it 2 steps forward?" And he wanted to be modest, and 1 step backward in Nigeria. I said, well, maybe you should be honest enough and say 10 steps backward. Well, such are the stuff of statesmen, such are the stuff of great men. You don't have such greatness in a continuous chain without interruption. I think that has never happened. That is not even natural. The natural order of things, is history is checkered, is jagged. The standards are set by one great man or by some great man, and then there will be challenges along the way. So what democracy does is its capacity for auto-correction, for the citizens, for the institutions, for the systems to say, we can't go lower than what has been established. We're obviously struggling. We need to buckle up and do better. So yes, there are challenges of keeping up with the standards, but that essentially is democracy. That essentially is human nature.
I don't know if I'd say that is democracy, but that is
because
democracy. Democracy manifests itself in a slightly more sophisticated way.
Well, in democracy, people have right to retreat. It's a choice of the majority.
There is democracy and there's the rule of law, and they're supposed to go hand in hand.
Well, there's
rule of law means that you can't.
There's no democracy.
You don't rig elections.
Exactly. There's no democracy.
Do things
the assumption is there's no democracy without rule of law, and what we're seeing, rule of law as a normative practice, I wouldn't want to go into the details of what is rule of law, or what is not rule of law, but I think it's democratic space where ideas are contested, where ideas are presented, where the voters and the stakeholders are supposed to look through these ideas and pick which side is the best.
But that's an ideal situation, and the argument is that situation doesn't prevail in Nigeria, that people's votes often do not count, and that's a known fact.
Yeah, so that's the introduction we started. I said President Jonathan's famous phone call started way back in 2010, 5 years earlier, when he institutionalized and restructured INEC by appointing, obviously, an activist as INEC chairman. So I think those are the reforms.
Right.
That
well, it kind of got, it grew legs during his administration, but then those legs were cut off subsequently. But let me ask you this, as someone who was close to him, who clearly admires him, as do many people in Nigeria and around the world. I mean, there's a lot of talk about people urging him to return to politics. Do you see him doing that?
I would say yes and no, unfortunately. Yes, because I know the passion he has for Nigeria, the passion he has for African continent, and the passion he has for the third world generally, the low and middle income countries, and his desire to see Nigeria given the moral spine for a kind of black civilization, black renaissance, and Nigeria becoming the first black superpower. So on one side, I know about this. And on the other side, I know the philosophical and intellectually bent Jonathan, who sees things more from deeply philosophical and ideological angle. So I think it's the question of bringing these two sides of President Jonathan together. And eventually what will pull him to serve again is if that commitment to African greatness is still weighs heavily in him.
Well, I would have liked to talk with you a lot more because you sound really interesting, but we'll leave it for another day. But thank you very much indeed for coming in and illuminating us with your knowledge of Goodluck Jonathan. Nuruddin Mohammed was the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and Supervising Minister of Information in the Jonathan administration. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much, Charles.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.